All right. So welcome everybody to SLiTHER number 52. It's amazing we've made it to 52, and I'm so glad that a handful of us could be here today to discuss a topic that seems to come up at a lot of Viper events. So at the fellows meeting and workshops, this is always a topic of how do we get students ready to go. So with that, we're going to start things off with Sarah. So I'm going to pass it off to Sarah, who's going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll be able to pick it up from there. So take it away.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Yeah, this actually came from a Viper Fellows workshop, and so I'll refer to that here in a little bit. Thinking about how to get students going at the beginning of the semester, especially in upper level classes, or even just first semester to second semester type classes, where we really need to get them kind of up to speed and remembering the things that we need them to remember to do the new material. It has been, I don't know, something that has evolved with me since I've been at Dickinson. Dickinson's a small liberal arts college, so everything that I've done in the context of having very small classes. But for those of you who may be at bigger schools or have larger classes, I definitely have some ideas of how to amend things or adjust things that would make, these things transferable to whatever kind of class size you might have. Okay, so like I said, Viper Fellows cohort 2 made me do it. I forget who asked the question, but at one point, in one of our big group discussions, we were, hitting on, man, they just don't remember. And how do you, I don't want to spend all this time on review. And, there are prerequisite courses for inorganic. I teach more of a junior senior level inorganic course without a sophomore level inorganic course. So it's that version of things. But they do have several prerequisite courses. And, we were thinking about, what we need students to be able to do and know before we really start, and how we help them remember. And I was describing some of what I'll describe here in a moment. And as someone, maybe Ann Bentley, said, you should do a SLiTHEr. And I think I messaged Taylor from that conversation to try to get this started. So this really was born out of a discussion that had with some of our colleagues. And as far as my class goes, like I said, it's more of a junior senior level thing. I also teach thermo, and I teach thermo in the spring semester. Inorganic comes in the fall. I've been treating that as a sequence, even though it's not really a sequenced course. I've been treating it as a sequence because, well, it's me, and most of my students do take thermo and then inorganic right one semester right after the other. And it helps with, kind of cohesion of lab skills and content. Our inorganic course is also the writing and the discipline course. And so I don't want to take students from basically zero to trying to write manuscripts in one semester. So I do a lot of writing in thermo as well to try to build that up. But the thing is, there's just lots from Gen Chem that they need to remember. There are ideas from organic they need to remember. They need to access this prior knowledge in a new context of inorganic chemistry. And so on my mind lately have been these kind of pedagogical thinking and learning kinds of experiences. I actually just listened to a podcast of Hidden Brain a couple of days ago about learning from your mistakes and some of the just predispositions most of us have in terms of receiving criticism and feedback. And so telling somebody that they don't know something, telling somebody that they need to do better, that those are kind of psychologically difficult things for a lot of people. And I really recommend that podcast if you're, kind of in the mood to listen to something on a drive or, at the gym or whatever. It was really interesting in thinking about our students and how we get feedback. Also, a few years ago, I did a workshop here at Dickinson on this book, How Learning Works. I believe there's a new edition. They've got 8 research-based principles for smart teaching now. But the things that stuck with me from that experience is how important it is to really activate that prior knowledge. You can't just assume that because somebody has seen something before that they're automatically going to go back and grab it at the right time, in the right place, in the right way. And also thinking about expert blind spots as the professors were, the expert in the room. And, as much as we all know, no one's born knowing how to do chemistry. Some of this stuff really starts to feel like I've known it forever. And so it kind of helps to remind myself that there are going to be those blind spots in my teaching that show up. And, how do I not punish students for me having this blind spot? Finally, I took a course on Coursera the summer before we came back for online teaching during COVID, because I thought, well, that's only fair because we were all online that semester. And the things that stuck with me from that were the importance of practicing and quizzing, and that most of us, most of the time, don't want to quiz ourselves because it's uncomfortable. And how to group knowledge into manageable kind of bins to store it in. And then also thinking about this idea of interleaving, where you don't go through topics necessarily linearly, but you have to kind of refer back and interleave that knowledge. So lots of kind of good ideas floating around and hopefully informing how I've approached this idea of kind of a low touch review. So there's nothing that I kind of dislike doing more than giving a review session, right? Just lecturing through, here's what we did in the last unit, or here's what you should already know. Probably my first year, I thought I would be a nice professor and give a review session, and it was probably one of the least useful things I'd ever done as an instructor. And so for this idea of kind of like a low touch review to help students review their own materials, is I've instituted a practice of having student-led review presentations very early in the semester. And I've done this in thermo, right? So this isn't inorganic, but there's no reason one couldn't do it in inorganic. The major review that I do for inorganic is what I call inorganic warm-ups on Moodle, where it's a self-paced kind of review with Moodle-based items and then an online quiz. So it's really low touch for me. And then another item I've done in inorganic that's really been kind of more on the fun side is collaborative models of bonding, where students really try to rebuild their knowledge of bonding and how atomic and molecular orbitals work, just kind of on the fly. So those books and podcasts and online courses had me thinking about what I'm actually asking students to do with these activities. And it's asking them to access that prior knowledge and engage with it in the right way at the right time, at least for these activities. And then in kind of a metacognitive way, it asks them to think about what makes a good review. When you want to review something or learn something, what makes something useful for you as a learner, as a student? There's a lot of collaboration, so nobody's necessarily on the spot in real time. And then there are quizzes that test their knowledge and give them a low stakes kind of way to demonstrate that, oh yeah, I do remember this stuff. Okay. So the first one I'll talk about is this idea of review presentations. Again, this is my thermal class. I had 6 students last semester. So I could do this kind of approach in the way I'm going to describe because of the numbers. And so what I've done is I've generated some topics that should be familiar from Gen Chem and Organic. I let the students pick and then assign early dates in the semester for them to give these presentations. Usually together, but sometimes not. We make a rubric for what would be a good presentation, what they want to see from each other. It ends up being about the same no matter what. But I like the idea that, you know, they aren't going to just jump in. They're going to introduce the topic, provide some context, define all of those key terms, give an example problem that they can solve and show what the, you know, how to approach a problem in their topic. And then make sure that the other students have a chance to try one on their own. And then, of course, you know, whether they do PowerPoint, something else online, or whether they just do a chalk talk, those things are all fine. But we've got to have like nice, clear, meaningful display of what they're trying to discuss. Like I said, I've done this, this class was very small, so they did these individually. I've also had them work in partnerships. One thing I would do if I were to do this and we were teaching remotely, or if I had a big class, I'd have this be a video project where they record themselves demonstrating or discussing the topic and then posting on them. And so this is just an example of what one of my students recently did. He decided to go with a PowerPoint presentation. And they get very, the ones who do PowerPoint, it's kind of heartwarming to see how serious they get about their presentation. And so just kind of laying out, I skipped over the definitions, but this is kind of the approach to the problem solving that the student laid out for others. You know, giving the key kind of components of the problem. His example problem, he decided to handwrite, which I thought was kind of, I don't know, just kind of a personal touch in a way. I haven't used my teacher voice in months, so now it's like my throat is disagreeing with me, so excuse me if I cough a little bit. But student laid out the problem, solved it, discussed it. It was really nice. And then again, one of the things that I've seen happen so many times is that they get kind of clever, right? So in the example problem, he set the problem up with molarity. In the problem for you to try, he set it up with moles and then a volume. And so, you know, with the idea that, oh, you know, you've got to remember to use the proper units. And so a lot of them so often add a little twist or extend the difficulty a little bit. And it really seems like they are internalizing some of the methods that they see us use in teaching, that we don't just want them to do the same problem over and over again. We don't want them to just only know how to do one type of problem without assessing the situation and making the right choices. So it's been kind of interesting that when, you know, early in the semester, putting the teaching of the class in their own hands for just a moment, even they are engaging with the material in a way that goes beyond even what I would have asked them to do. So with the review presentations, students do get an early experience of success. Just kind of uniformly, my students have done really nice work with giving the presentations. The follow-up material, they get to share with each other all of the materials or the problems that they create, the handouts. So they're really helping each other learn. Everyone contributes to the learning of the class and kind of the refresher in the class. And it kind of does give the message that they're responsible for their own learning. I post the materials on Moodle for them to study because there is a follow-up quiz. And I can refer to those materials, they can refer to those materials. And it's just kind of a nice little thing tucked into our course Moodle site that, sets the stage for the rest of the semester. The second item that I've used to help students kind of get going is this online, totally Moodle-based, provided by me warm-up activity. And so I post some videos. I'll show you some screenshots of my Moodle page in a moment, but they review these materials kind of on their own. And within the first week or two of the semester, they're meant to go through a quiz that is totally on Moodle. So I don't really even have to touch it after I make it because it's more or less self-grading. The previous quiz was kind of a one-off with maybe some individual redos if somebody really missed the boat, but I have the Moodle quiz for this one set up, take it 3 times for a high score. I don't really care if you get it all right the first time. I don't care at all. I'm not even going to look. I just want your high score. And I try to encourage students to shoot for an 85%, and most of them get well over 90. So first screenshot for my Moodle site, kind of reminding them that, even though this is our first and only inorganic class at Dickinson, they already know some things about inorganic. And we need to be able to refresh some of those fundamentals and not necessarily spend class time on them, right? And so the topics that I have available are listed, electron configurations, atomic and ionic diameters, some theories of bonding, simple MO diagrams, things like that. And we do have quantum, right? So that's our Chem 341. It's a pre or a co-requisite for inorganic. And so it kind of works. It's always worked out that about half of my students, no matter how big or small my class is, about half of my students have taken quantum and half of them haven't. So, there's a little bit of a way that I arrange the semester to mitigate that differential in knowledge. But this part of the program doesn't rely on their having completed quantum or not. Okay, so what I post are some videos that I made. I've got a screenshot of some of that in a moment. I've used Screencast-O-Matic, or so one of those kind of handwritten recording of the writing and sound to kind of talk through like a mini lecture on some of the topics. And then I have other pages in Moodle that include more static items and links to like YouTube videos, because why do we need to recreate everything? We don't. There are great videos out there that exist and that can explain these ideas in fundamental, succinct kind of way. And so one of my screenshots here is just, I was talking through some quantum numbers and the shapes of d orbitals, because it's this is one of those places where I've run into my blind spot. I think everybody knows what the d orbitals look like all the time, and that it really shouldn't be a problem. And routinely, either because students have more or less comfort in thinking three-dimensionally and spatially, they never saw the d orbitals. Maybe their Gen Chem professor just stopped at P and that was it. And, maybe that was fine, but I want to make sure that they, have an idea of how to use the axes, how to draw these things, because there's so much spatial thinking involved in inorganic. And so kind of getting that going early is helpful. And part of the reason why I do this in the video, I'm drawing things and describing how I'm thinking about the orbitals. Again, this is, early success in the semester where they may be nervous that, they're taking a course that requires physical chemistry as a prerequisite. Oh my gosh. Having that early success and kind of self-paced, self-teaching, self-review seems to be helpful. And it seems to be, establishing that expectation that you're going to really, you're the one empowered for your learning. I'm here, but really, one of my, least favorite comments on a student evaluation would be like, well, I basically had to teach myself. Well, yeah, you did. I hit a nerve.
You have.
But yeah, you did. You did have to teach yourself.
You have to learn it for yourself.
There is no way I can open up the brain, or any of us can open up the brain of a student and just transfer the knowledge, right? I'm here to help. But, there's so much that students can do themselves and can, really feel that success from something that they did themselves. And again, the multiple attempts thing, this is first couple of weeks of the semester. They're coming off of summer. Maybe they're, not really back into the mode of being in school yet. And maybe it's been several years since they've thought about this. They're more of a biochem or organic type. That's fine. I don't care that they remember it right away. I care that they remember it though. And, or maybe relearn it. Right. And also to kind of emphasize that this is an iterative process, right? You don't learn things perfectly the first time through. Right? And it also, that the podcast, the Hidden Brain podcast about receiving feedback, mentioned a strategy called failing in the dark, where, they're quizzing themselves by themselves. Yeah, I can go back and look at all the scores on Moodle as if I have that kind of time. But if they really mess up or they don't review because they think they know it all, okay, fine. And they get a poor score on that first one, they failed in the dark because no one necessarily knows but them. And I really don't care if they remember it the first time. And failing in the dark without witnesses, without, somebody going, oh, I thought you were a junior chemistry major. I guess, you just don't know. Whatever, that doesn't help things. The guilt and the kind of shaming doesn't really help things. And it avoids that kind of social avoidance of feeling like a failure, to fail in the dark, at least for this kind of option. The final approach that I've used, that's been really fun in a surprising way, is to just divide my class up into small groups. And really, in a class of 6, a small group is a pair. But this could work for sure with I would say probably 5-ish max, and you can always add more subjects for students to refresh on. But I've divided them in small groups, and I've placed on the whiteboards bonding theories around, and then basically say, okay, grab a pen, come tell me some true things about each of these theories. You can draw, you can write, you can do equations, you can ask questions, and there's a clock running, right? So they can't just stand there forever. And then when the timer goes off, they rotate. And so the next group hits that topic where the first group started, and they can correct things, they can add things, they can illustrate things. And I'm kind of moseying around asking probing questions or saying, well, what about this? Or say, what do you think about that idea? That seems, is that how you count electrons? And they'll end up correcting each other or adding each other. And we'll rotate through, if I have 3 groups and 3 topics, we'll rotate each of them through each topic, and then kind of sit back and summarize at the end. And this is another thing to do early on, where, honestly, I'm usually really impressed with what they come up with, and can, give that kind of praise and offer success early on. The topics that I've used, just because, again, the size of my class, I have them do Lewis structures and VSEPR, and then I group valence bond theory with hybrid orbitals, and then molecular orbital theory. And, they have to go through the pros and cons of each. They may say where, there's a benefit to using this model. There might be a limitation to using the model. In thermo, that most of them will have just had with me, we talk a lot about models and where they're useful and where they break down. So this is another kind of continuation of that. And there are so many, oh yeah, kind of moments, or yeah, okay, no, I was thinking about that wrong, and they'll kind of collaborate and talk. There's something different about thinking while standing. I don't know. There's a different energy in the room. So rather than having them gather around a worksheet or something like that at tables, there's something a little bit different about thinking while standing, that brings some nice energy to the beginning of the semester, where otherwise we could just be sitting there and I'm droning on about a review session. Right? It's also interesting because I get some real-time diagnostics, right? I get to see what they remember. I get to see how they're thinking. I get to see how they're working together. I get to see who maybe is a little more hesitant or who is going to really stand out as a leader. And I get to, kind of tweak those interactions a little bit too. A couple of board shots. I've got, this was my valence bond and hybrids, and had students drawing different orbitals, drawing orbital interactions. Anti-bonding looks angry, bonding looks happy. That's great. Whatever helps. They've got their hybrid orbitals, and I don't know if it's something I see because of something that's happening with teaching here, or if it's a common thing, but I need to get them to like shade orbitals for sign, and so I can kind of start emphasizing that with this activity. And there's one of my students, she was the one who likes to draw the little people. So this was the Lewis and VSEPR, and that was the seesaw, right? So they were remembering some of the molecular shapes that happen and when you VSEPR, right? And this is kind of like a little bit of a side quest, but also something that I tend to use with that models of bonding. I have the students make, I at least want, SP and D orbitals. Somebody got brave and started making some F orbitals there. But I have them use those with another LO that I tend to use for orbital overlap. That was a Vanessa McCaffrey learning object where, again, that three-dimensional thinking is harder for some people, easier for others. It was always easy for me, and so I didn't need this kind of thing. And so that's kind of another one of my expert blind spots that I try to get out of the way. It's really helpful for some students to have a model and to have those orbitals interact with each other and really see and feel, and then hopefully maybe internalize a little bit more the spatial arrangements that are possible. So conclusions? I don't know. I mean, this is a SLiTHER. It's not a full on chem ed project yet, but it seems to work for me. More so, it takes really this full review, which is just a miserable experience whenever I've tried to do it, and puts it back in students' hands in different ways. And the importance of accessing that prior knowledge in low stakes environments so we can build on it has really kind of set off my semesters in a more positive way, because I'm not disappointed when they don't remember. I don't make the assumption and then get disappointed if they don't remember, because I just ask them to demonstrate it in this kind of lower stakes, collaborative or independent way. Also have different modes of displaying knowledge, right? So there are quizzes, there are presentations, there are these collaborative things. It also really establishes the expectation that I expect them to do, to take ownership on their learning, and lots of opportunities for friendly feedback, low stakes feedback, conversational feedback that hopefully establishes a rapport that when I am giving them a little more direct feedback on a lab report or an exam, that they know it is generated from this place of really wanting to see them succeed, right? And finally, I think anytime we can help them think metacognitively, so what makes a good review? What would help you understand this better? What helps you remember things? Anytime we can have students apply metacognitive skills, it just helps them as a learner. That's a longer term investment in their education that hopefully continues to pay some dividends. But I found that it helps them be better students and me be a better teacher for them, because we're both thinking about learning and not just the content in isolation. Okay. So thanks for coming. I know it's still summer and people are traveling and such. So for those of you who were able to join, thank you so much, and thanks to Tyler for organizing this and setting it up and shepherding all the SLiTHERs. Viper Fellows Cohort 2, they was a great group, and I thank them for encouraging me to participate in a SLiTHER and kind of share some of my ideas. And as always, the chemistry students at Dickinson College are the reason I do what I do, and are inspirational for helping me become hopefully a better teacher every time they see me in a class. And finally, just because this is a SLiTHER and I live in the mountains of Pennsylvania, I had a viper of my own come try to visit my house a few days ago. And so there's my timber rattler that was removed safely for everyone involved. So it's just perfect timing for the SLiTHER.
Yeah, that's quite the visitor.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for kicking things off. So now it's a little bit more open. So if anyone has any questions, or this is more of a comment than a question, whatever that is, if you want to kind of contribute or throw out ideas, the floor is kind of open. So where are we at?
So how much time do you actually spend kind of going through these different review activities?
So with the presentations, if I have a small class, I'll continue to do them live, and I take 10 or 15 minutes. I kind of try to limit them to 10 or 15 minutes a pop. And I have my lecture and labs are always joined, so I can take some time during lab as well to, as we're kind of getting started, things are getting going. I don't feel like I've lost much time, and anytime I don't have to re-present material, I think is a win. And again, I'm usually really, really pleasantly surprised in a way every time when students do that. Now for the I don't take any time at all for the totally online Moodle, like the warm-up idea. That's all been done, uploaded, and they do it within the first couple of weeks of the semester. I don't see it. There is no time loss, no class time lost there. And with the collaborative bit, that's probably about 30 minutes of class time between folks moving around the different spots and then summarizing. So I don't think that's too much more than what I would do if I were to just review that live. And it's about the amount of time I would want to spend on like a workshop or a worksheet activity or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that doing, if one were to do the review presentations, and if I had more than 5 or 6, I'd probably transition them to either doing group presentations or doing a video project that then is done outside of class. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do the students have anything to say about this? Like in terms of what they gain from seeing other people like go through it, like as the collaborative effort, right? So someone else goes up on the board and writes about Lewis structures. The other 4 people in the room, like, do they make comments about it being helpful?
I mean, I'm trying to think. It seems like it's fun because they're all most of them feel kind of thrown in the deep end of the pool for a moment. And then, they're kind of remembering, and that's the fun part for me, is watching them go, oh yeah. Or if I say, well, what is a sigma bond? And then they go, oh yeah, and then draw. I think I've seen the most comments about the student-led review presentations, the little more formal thing, that they'll say, oh, I've never had a chance to teach a topic in chemistry before, and that was really interesting. And we don't get to present much in chemistry classes outside of our senior seminars, so it's really good practice. There was one time that I had a really just big burly football player in my class, and he did an amazing review presentation, and like literally the other students in the class were just applauding, and they were like, Gavin, you should be a teacher, you should teach that, you should become a teacher. And he was like, oh, really? Yeah, that was awesome. He's been teaching high school and coaching football in New Jersey since he graduated. He did a Woodrow Wilson teaching fellowship. Never would have occurred to him to pursue a career in education. So funny things like that come up that are just really kind of sweet to see. It was so sweet to see his classmates just go, that was awesome. So yeah, they do indicate that it's helpful, but not always in the most direct way, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking because in these kinds of review activities or kind of getting people back on board, I'm always super excited to see the people that are like plugged in and they get the activity, they have a good presentation, or they're really solid with their review or whatever. The people who are kind of in that like mid range, I'm still happy to see it because like they're engaging, they need a little bit of tweaking, and that's why we're there, right? To make sure.
Yeah.
The ones I struggle with are the few that have made it to that point and are like, what is a mole again, right? Like, and those are kind of the questions that are always harder. And you said you get a little bit of diagnostic info, but I think also creating a climate where they can ask questions and maybe talk to each other a little bit more formally would also be helpful. But those are the students I always kind of struggle to get back up on board because our inorganic class is a senior level class. So it's like, in some ways, like, okay, I got to get you through some fundamentals of like 2.5 years of our curriculum in order to connect.
Yeah, sometimes I've had some of those students myself, and so sometimes I'll just say, what do you think a senior chemistry major should know? What do what are our superpowers as chemists? What should you know? What should you be good at? As a chemistry person. And sometimes that's interesting.
Any other questions or comments or things that you've tried in your classes?
Yeah.
Well, since you heard me during the presentation when you struck a nerve, which I haven't heard that before, I do some similar things, not so much in class, but I'll give them a quiz the first day as a take-home assignment. And a certain amount of time, and you can come and get the green pen of guidance. So I'm holding up a green pen here. And the green pen of guidance will make some marks on it, saying things are not quite right. And if you wish to discuss them with me and make the green pen of guidance happy. So there you go. It's the kind of low stakes. So it gives me some feel for how they work. And since most of them will have had me in general chemistry, so they've known about that for quite some time. And get them up to where I want them to be to start, because I really disliked hearing a talk. Well, I spent my first 3 weeks in inorganic chemistry reteaching gen chemists. No, we're not going to do that. You're going to do it on your own with the help and guidance of the green pen. So.
Yep.
Yeah,
I like the green pen of guidance for sure. That's cool.
I haven't taught inorganic for, I think it's 8 years now. So I'm teaching our sophomore inorganic, which is a lot of Gen Chem 3. So I find that we have an issue with a lot of our students waiting till they're seniors to take it. And we have a lot of minors that take it their late spring of junior or senior year, and they've forgotten a lot of stuff. So trying to find ways to review some of that knowledge. And one of the things I've done in the past, which I will continue to do, it's a modification of one of the it's actually in the Viper website, where I divide them in groups and they go around the boards, and it's a PowerPoint and it says like 2 atoms. What was it, like 2 elements, 2 atoms? They have to draw a Lewis structure that matches that, and they go through and so you give them ones where they have to think about it, and then eventually and then I start talking about expanded octets. So I'll tell them to draw DMSO, because their organic profs talk about sulfoxides, and I'll ask them, I'll say, why'd you draw sulfur oxygen double bond? they'll sit and they'll think about it. They'll think about it because you have an expanded octet. Then eventually one of them says, well, that's how my organic professor did it. And I say, that's a valid answer. And then I'll go up and draw it with a single bond. And I say, what's wrong with this Lewis structure? Oh,
Yeah.
And then we usually get into a big discussion. Well, is it a double? Is it? So how can you tell the difference? And they'll talk about bond length. Well, then you have formal charges. Well, it's going to be charged. It's going to, so we get into a whole lot of discussion, and I found that's a good way. It reviews Lewis structures really good, but then it also points out the limitations of Lewis structures and gets us talking about, okay, Gen Chem was very black and white. Now we're looking at the gray areas. But I like this idea of presentations, or even the early quiz, because I've got last looked, I think I have 20 starting in this semester in my inorganic class. So that might be an interesting thing to try. The first week, have them, lecture 2, lecture 3 in some groups, talk about some things.
Mhm. Yeah, the pretty lies we tell in Gen Chem, right? I mean, that's
Right.
Yeah.
that's a thing, and having students recognize that okay, we were using the model to this extent and it only got us this far. That's useful if you're in that zone, but then if
Yeah.
you're outside of that zone, you've got to, what's the truth now? Oh no.
No, I actually have a line that I used all the time, and it ends up as a bonus question on the exam when we hit something. So don't tell the first years. So all the little things along the way that here's an extension. Oh, sweating with a negative charge. What?
It looks like Joe raised his hand.
Yeah.
You have the floor.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to ask this on a recorded thing that's going to get posted because I'm sure there's no question it speaks poorly of me, which is why I'm going to keep my camera muted. But what I'm wondering here is, well, I over the years actually cut down on student presentations, particularly at the upper level. And my concern was I used to have regular presentations in inorganic on some advanced topics. And maybe it wasn't every year, but it's often enough that I gave somebody, a group or pair, a whole class period, and they just did such a lousy job with it that I remember thinking, like, I burned an entire class period. They just saw this terrible lecture. Maybe it was full of errors. So I obviously, I completely respect having them work through this themselves and present and that kind of thing. But how do you approach it? Because it must happen. If you're doing this often, it must happen that you get groups that just phone it in, or just even worse, they present it to the group with a whole bunch of mistakes. And you're like, oh, geez, we're actually getting worse here. Just thoughts on recovery or how you approach that.
Well, I mean, I didn't go into it as much, but I do tell them I don't want to let you lie to each other, unintentionally, of course, but I don't want to let you lie to each other. And so I do ask for PowerPoint slides or an outline beforehand. And most of my students feel enough social pressure to do well that I don't have to require it. But I think if I would get burned a couple of times, I'd require it. And if it's a PowerPoint slide, and maybe I'd standardize what, yes, it has to be some sort of a slide deck kind of presentation. Yes, I want to see your solved problem, and your notes on the explanation. But at least with these topics, it's a pretty quick kind of flip through, and I don't give the students the whole time. This is 15 minutes Gen Chem level presentation. But I think, the higher the stakes are for the amount of time, because class time is precious, I would want to see the slides beforehand, and might delay somebody's presentation until they came to talk with me about it. I have a colleague in biology who his a little more hands-on with that kind of stuff, and absolutely requires he will grade the slides beforehand and give them feedback beforehand. So that's probably what I do if I got burned. I haven't been yet, so.
The last couple times, granted, it's like I said, it's been 7 or 8 years since I've taught this class. Near the end of the semester, about 3/4 of the way through, I've had them do group presentations on special topics, things we haven't covered. And I have a list of possible topics, but they can come to choose me things. A popular one is a lot of them like to talk about F block elements, because I usually don't cover that. I had, the last time I did it, I had a group that actually did a talk on inorganic compounds in cosmetics. And the last time I did it, I had one group who had a lot of errors with their presentation. And so I understand that. In the past, having done it in groups, usually I've never assigned groups, I've let them self choose. And usually there's at least 1 or 2 conscientious students in each group where there's not going to be things that are obliviously wrong. But I'm considering, I don't know if I'm going to do that again this semester or not, but if I do, I definitely want to see the slide decks before they do it, just to make sure there aren't anything egregious. And I also have them prepare a 1-page handout that I copy and give to everyone so they can study off of for the exam, because I do have exam questions on the other group's presentations. So that's usually given me enough, okay, there might be an issue here ahead of time without having to look at the actual slides.
Yeah, and if I've had a couple of students who I think in the moment of like talking and writing end up saying something incorrectly, because wow, that's easy to do, and then I'll I'll warn them, if you're going, if you're zigging when you should have zagged, I might interrupt you. And it's not, it's not anything bad. It's just that I want to make sure you're saying what you mean to say. And, and then they're like, oh, okay. Like, she's there to support me doing this well, as opposed to just letting them, run off the rails so far and so hard into the ravine and crashing and burning. And, I'm like, nobody wants that. Right? So I'd rather be a little awkward and say, I'm going to stop you there. I think what you mean to say is blah, blah, blah. And they'll go, oh yeah. And then they'll fix it. And so far it's not been, it's not been too bad, but I'm definitely okay with being a little awkward.
Yeah, I think that there's like a give and take with like the significance of the presentation and like the amount of scaffolding that kind of leads up to it. So when I've done like end of quarter presentations, I tend to keep them short also, because then if they go completely off the rails at that point, it's a shorter chunk, right, that we can recover from. But also if it's worth a decent bit of their grade or whatever, there are steps leading up to it. So in our survey of organic class, I've taught a decent number of times for like nutrition, and some other bio majors take it, just the 1 quarter class. We do an interesting molecule project at the end. So they, work in groups and they pick a molecule that's of historical or whatever importance. It used to be like drugs, and then it turned into like, well, I'm interested in agriculture, so I want to do something on pesticides. And I found that doing some kind of a like rough draft day where they have 20 minutes to ask questions and work together in class, that kind of helped bring people at least onto the same page. And it also just limited some of the really outliers from the end, right? You don't get anything that's a blank project at the end, because at least they had a chance to see what other people are doing. But yeah, and I think if it's at the beginning of the term, it's a lot more informal, and I think it comes across as like, oh, we're getting back up to speed, right? And I think with it being less formal, it's less intimidating as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's, the students who commented, we don't, at least here, they don't get to present much. as compared to maybe in their bio classes where they present more often. Having at least one opportunity in one of my classes to do kind of a informal, a little more collaborative presentation on something that they are, you know, even if they have to remember it, they should have been pretty well versed on it at some point, so they can get it back together. Tends to serve like all of those purposes. It gets them talking, it gets them remembering, it gets them going, oh, I know this better than I thought. I can, you know, I have some knowledge. I'm not just new at everything. And it seems to establish a pretty good rapport in the class.
And I think being able to point back to it, I've also found to be really helpful. Where it's like, oh, in week 2 or week 3, like we're talking about something like, I don't know, Slater's rules or something, right? Being able to point back and say, like, now remember, right? I wanted us to review on our electron configurations because that was something from Gen Chem, and I kind of expect that you can at least do up to this stage. So now let's move on from there. I think it kind of defines that point that we're starting at for the class. Because it's one of those things like, well, everyone is at these different points or maybe has different remembrances. And so establishing that baseline, I think, is really helpful too.
Well, and the idea of accessing prior knowledge, it's like you could just say, okay, well, you all remember how to do electron configurations, right? Well, we're going to extend it. And they're like, do I? You don't know, really. They should, but maybe if they had a moment to think about it, they really would. And so it activates that prior knowledge in the way that we want. So it's kind of fresh, it's kind of in the forefront of their brains. It's not something they have to kind of search the memory banks for in the moment.
All right, well, it is the hour. So thank you, Sarah, again for presenting. Thanks everyone for coming and giving some questions and some discussion. Feel free to carry the discussion forward onto Discord, and we'll probably be seeing some of this stuff, right, that pops up on the Viper site as well. So be sure to use some LOs and get some feedback and practice with those as you go. So thank you all. I hope you all had a good afternoon and evening. Stay cool out there if you're in a heat wave, and we'll see you around.